Hey everyone, in this week's video, I want to explore a concept called electronic invoicing or e-invoicing. Now, in some countries around the world, e-invoicing has really taken off. In other countries, it's really failed. Some of the bigger countries, it's really failed. And I wanted to ask the question this week, is e-invoicing the beta max of the 2020s? So I do realize that not everyone is 50 or 60 years old and understands what Betamax is. So I think the best way to start this video is rewinding to the early 70s. So guys, in the 60s and early 70s, if you wanted to watch TV, you basically turned your television on and you received a signal from the television company and you watched what they set out. There was no other option. In 1975, Sony thought, geez, we can do better than this. And they actually released a system called the Betamax system, which enabled people to record television and watch rented movies. So suddenly we had things on demand. A full year later, JVC released the VHS system. But by 1981, the VHS system had taken over 75% of the market. By 1987, the VHS system had almost 100% of the market. The thing is, Sony was released earlier and actually had a better quality of picture. So the question is, what went wrong? So yeah, what went wrong? Well, the video wars is a whole other topic, but briefly, what went wrong is that Sony produced a really good product at a high price. JVC came along a year later. They produced a product that wasn't quite as good, but it was significantly less expensive. And they brought a whole bunch of partners with them as well. They licensed out their product to other manufacturers, and those manufacturers drove the cost down. So when a consumer went to the shop to buy a video recorder, they had one Betamax option, and they might have had 10 or 15 way cheaper VHS options. So suddenly entry to the market was a lot easier with a VHS system, and that's why it gained such dramatic market share. So about 200 to 300 years ago, when companies were sort of kicking off, they realized they needed a way of trading with each other and actually exchanging goods and services for money. And that's when they developed the invoice system. It basically was a system as when I sold you something, I'd send you an invoice, you'd look at the invoice and say, yes, that's what you sold me, and you'd pay me for that. Now, the original invoice was probably written out longhand by the person with the neatest writing in the office. It was probably delivered by an underpaid Victorian child, and that system kind of worked. Now, over time, we developed the postal system, we developed typewriters, and for probably a couple of 100 years, we lived with that system where you get sent an invoice, you pay it. About 25 years ago, someone kind of looked at this and went, hey, we have this new fandangle thing called email. Let's send the invoices over email, and then we save ourselves the cost of the postage, and we also save ourselves a little bit of time. And that's kind of where we are today. That's the system that most people still use. But about 20 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, someone sat back and went, hey, we could rethink this. Instead of this whole paper invoice thing, maybe we just come up with an electronic format and everyone uses it. Hence the idea of e-invoicing was born. So fundamentally, e-invoicing is kind of a cool idea. What it is taking all that information that you've got on your normal paper invoice or PDF invoice, if you get it via email, and you put it into a predetermined format. So the system knows where the invoice date is. It knows where the invoice number is. It knows where the total is, the price, the quantity, all that information that you might have on an invoice. And we actually link our systems up. So I would link my billing system to the e-invoice format. It would then produce a bill in that format, send it to my client who would also understand the format. They would take that format and load it up into their accounting system. It's a really cool way of eliminating errors, and it's a really great way of processing a lot of data. But there's one fundamental problem with it. So before we get into some more details, I did want to make a distinction between e-invoicing and accounts payable automation or AP automation. So the difference is that AP automation still uses those paper documents. It still uses Word documents or PDF documents, and it runs optical character recognition over the top to turn those words into electronic information, and then it uses that electronic information to decide what to do with the invoice. E-invoicing eliminates those Word documents and paper documents altogether. So before we talk about the issues that come with e-invoicing, let's talk about the benefits and why it was actually developed in the first place. So when you look at a normal invoice, one of the problems you got is that there's no standard set format for this invoice. This invoice, for example, doesn't have the word quantity on it. It's got QTY. It does have unit price, and it does have some other information, but it doesn't have the word tax number on there. It's got tax hash. So whenever we look at an invoice, there's always some translation that's required. Now, there's software out there that will do the majority of the translation, but a lot of companies will actually ignore that completely and are still actually manually entering those invoices into their accounting system. Now, that manual processing is going to create some errors, and research suggests that around 2% of all invoices are actually paid in error. So if you think of your invoice totals over the years, adding 2% of those can be a significant amount of money. Also, there's some benefit around having electronic format, around reducing time. So the time that's required to actually get that invoice, process it, put it into a system. If we have a known format, we can reduce that, and that makes us more efficient. So there's certainly some great benefits around e-invoicing. Now, without wanting to sound too conspiracy theorist here, governments actually love e-invoicing for the simple reason that any government that has a VAT or a value-added tax, GST for example, they have problems tracking invoices between companies because of that translation error that I was talking about before. But if you have an electronic format where everything is already pre-understood, it's very easy for them to track what invoice was sent to what company or what GST was due on that invoice, and therefore what tax they should be getting paid. So it makes their life a lot easier. So the biggest problem with electronic invoicing is actually the complexity of invoices themselves. Invoices are as unique as the products that they're describing. So this invoice here, I just bought some pens off the internet. It's got quantity, SKU, whatever that is, name, unit price, tax, total, grand total, GST, shipping, etc., etc. And that's just for buying some pens off the internet. If I was buying legal services or I was buying a building, I would expect completely different information on that invoice. And that's when it gets problematic, because there's potentially thousands, if not millions, of invoice formats that you could have. And any electronic invoice format has to cater for all those different types of eventualities. So I think in the Australian electronic invoice format, there's somewhere between 800 and 1,000 different fields that you have to map to. And that creates our first problem. When we have our billing system, we have to actually map it to the electronic invoicing format, and therefore we need some technology that sits in the middle. And any technology like this comes with a price. So there's a price to entry for any electronic invoicing format. Look, the second issue with this one comes back to the government. So as I said, the government is actually one of the main beneficiaries of having an e-invoice format, but most democratic governments around the world don't really have the political will to enforce something like this. And I can understand it. No government out there really wants to put impediments in place for small business and make it more expensive for them to trade. So although governments like this, they're only ever going to encourage it. They're not going to enforce it until we can get to a point where we have, say, a cost-neutral e-invoice format. And because of the complexity, that looks like it's a fair way. So I suppose the question is, does e-invoicing have a future? And look, I think the answer is yes, e-invoicing does have a future. If I was running a big company that had long, complicated invoices, and in my career I've seen some invoices have up to 10,000 lines of information, electronic invoicing would be something I would be all over. I'd absolutely love it. And I'd certainly be encouraging my suppliers to get onto an electronic invoicing format, and we can trade over that format. That would be something I'd be super interested in. The problem is, if I'm running a small business, and I actually do run my own small consulting company, I send out one invoice a month. Am I going to pay $8,000 to access an e-invoicing solution for that one invoice? Or am I just going to continue using my free software to do it? Well, the answer is I'm going to probably continue using my free software to do it. So until we can get that barrier to entry down to a more reasonable price, it's not going to be something that's going to be widely taken on by the whole community unless it's enforced by the government and they don't have the political will to do it. So let's return to the initial question, which is e-invoicing like Betamax? Unfortunately, I think it is. Look, there are definitely some benefits around e-invoicing, and those benefits I think will be tangible to a lot of companies. You're going to see an increase in compliance, reduction in fraud, increase in efficiency, some really cool things. And if I was running the accounts department of a major company, I'd certainly be looking at this format and saying that's something we can benefit from. But the other problem is that the cost barrier to entry is going to be too prohibitive for a lot of small and medium businesses. They'll just say, look, hey, we're just going to continue what we've been doing for the last 20, 30 years, and it's almost free. It's software that we've already got, and therefore we're not going to change. And until you get actually a market shift and the market saying, hey, we want to go with this e-invoice format, I don't think it's really going to take off. But the last thing I want to say is I think e-invoicing has another parallel to Betamax, in that Betamax got replaced by VHS, which got replaced by DVD, which got replaced by streaming services. So where we've ended up has been completely different to the start of the journey. And I think that's going to happen with invoicing. I think in 20 or 30 years' time, it's going to get replaced by something that everyone is going to jump on board with. And then suddenly it's going to be the widely accepted way of trading. I just don't think we're there yet. Anyway, guys, I'm Andrew Chapman. If you like my content, hit the subscribe button. If you've got any questions or comments, put them in the comments back down below, and I'll be back to you as soon as I can. Till next week, have a good one.